Thank you. Thank you so much, Ina. I appreciate it. Christine as well. It's a pleasure to be here again to speak to your students here at MICA. It's definitely an honor. Actually, I look forward to this opportunity in these events. So that said, as Ina mentioned, we have a lot of information to cover. There's a lot of content. And today we'll be talking about protecting your finances. Now, do want to make mention that there'll be a copy of this presentation, as Ina mentioned, available for you. There are some segments that I believe that you may have been exposed to during a previous session. And so I'll kind of go over that quickly. But because, again, in the interest of time, the volume of information that's here, I'll go through it. There are some touch point questions that I'll ask just to kind of gauge where you are. And so I ask that question, you could either feel free to put it in chat or just unmute yourself and respond accordingly. All right, so with that said, let's get started. I'm going to actually turn off my camera so that I can have better bandwidth, but definitely I'm looking forward to sharing this information. All right, here we go. So protecting your finances. Really, one of the things that we need to understand when we're talking about your finances is that it's critical to understand how to manage and protect your finances, right? And so today with this session, we'll be talking about credit management basics. So what are the fundamental things with your credit that really influences your finances? What behaviors, right, can you really adapt so that you can have a better outcome as it relates to your finances, near term and long term? We'll also talk about quickly understanding your credit report, how to read and go through your credit report to identify, what's there, how to read it, right? And also if there are any errors, the steps that you can take to correct those errors. And then also we'll talk about protecting yourself. Really in this age right now, there's been a lot of uptick in terms of identity theft, fraud, right? So how do you recognize fraudulent activity and how do you protect yourself if you've fallen victim to said fraudulent activities so that the outcome will not be costly on your behalf, right? And then at the end, we'll actually bring everything together as we'll be sharing some financial health and wellness tips, really, again, some behaviors so that you can have not only near-term benefits in terms of managing finances, but also long-term benefits so that you could really be in a better financial situation so that, as you're working, as you're gaining income, as you're saving and so forth, you can really have some positive experiences in that regard, okay? So let's get started, right? So let's talk about credit management basics, right? So credit health really plays an important role throughout your life as an individual, whether you're trying to qualify for a loan or even looking for certain types of jobs. Credit is really the foundational underpinning of really being successful in that endeavor. And so really today, there's three basics that I want to kind of talk about and cover, right? Talk about credit, right? The behavior with your credit history, and ultimately your credit score, right? So really starting with credit, by definition, it's an arrangement between an individual or with a company where this individual receives services, goods, or products with the understanding that it will be paid for later, right? So again, you're securing services, goods, or products with the understanding that you will return or pay for it later to either an individual or a company, right? So it's important to understand what credit is, because as you'll realize, credit is everywhere, right? Whether you're applying to pay for your loan for school, or you're getting a credit card, renting a house, buying a house, or getting a car, whatever the case is, credit is essential and it's involved in that process. And then the behavior side of it is your credit history, right? Where your credit history really is a collection of all the financial information that you've accumulated, right, in your life. And your credit history helps creditors understand if you're someone where that they are comfortable lending or providing services to, understanding that you'll pay it later, right? So they really look at your credit history to understand what are the odds that you will make good on your commitment, or you'll repay any money that's been borrowed, or you'll satisfy the obligations that have been given or rendered to you, okay? And then your credit score is a number that really summarizes you as an individual what your risk is, right? And oftentimes your credit score or your FICO score is what lenders use to evaluate, right, whether or not they will lend to you a certain line of credit or certain types of rewards or programs you'll be eligible for, right? So really understanding what your credit score is or your FICO score will really help you have a good understanding or a sense of what your finances look like. And then it will also trigger and drive your behaviors towards your finances to really make the right decisions at the right time and have the right outcomes. Okay. So your FICO score or your credit score, right? Basically, they're used by 90% of the top lenders in this country, right? And lenders really can request FICO scores from all three of your credit reporting agencies. So who are those agencies? It's TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian, okay? And essentially, these scores, they influence your credit limit, your interest rate, the loan amount that you'd be eligible for, reward programs, balance transfers, and other types of offers that you would get from a lender, okay? And essentially a FICO score or your credit score is represented as a 3-digit number. And this 3-digit number is calculated from the history or your credit history, in which is found in your credit report over a particular period of time, okay? And this summary of information in your credit report is really lumped into one single number that helps lenders, as I mentioned earlier, evaluate you whether you're a good or a bad credit risk. So essentially, FICO scores or credit scores run from 300 on the low end to 850 on the high end, okay? So really, I want to help you crystallize that so it settles in. So really, here's a picture, right? What's a good FICO score? As I mentioned, it runs from the low end of 300 to the high end of 850. So on average, in 2022, the average US citizen or consumer rather had a FICO score of 716. So really 716 on this chart says near or slightly above average, right? And most lenders consider this a good score. So if you're at that 716 range, then you have good credit. So again, you'll have a copy of this, but when you decide to go and pull your FICO, your credit score, your credit history, compare against this and it'll give you a better understanding as to where you fall in the grand scheme of things, okay? So let's look at the components of a FICO score. Really, there are 5 components that feed into your FICO score, okay? And the largest one is your payment history. Remember, I told you the payment history is behavior driven. And this basically establishes or lets entities or lenders or banks know how your behavior is with repaying your obligations. So this accounts for 35% of your score. So if you're repaying your loans in a timely manner, then 35% of your score will be positive. Now, the other segment is the amounts that you owe, right? What types of credit do you have? Loans, credit cards, things of that sort. Are you using the full balance, right, in terms of available credit? Or are you just using a smaller portion and you're paying it back every month? Whatever the case is, 30% of that number is reflected in your credit score. And then the length of the credit history, the longer your credit history, the better your chances of having a better credit score. Simply because, again, you have a time frame that's in there where you have a longer runway of establishing good behavior, and that's reflected in your score. New credit, right? Are you applying for more credit, or are there multiple credit inquiries? And we'll talk about that later. That factors for 10% of your score. And then lastly, the mix, right? Do you have a healthy mix, or is it just all one type of credit? And that factors for 10% of your credit score as well. So really, this is a good barometer to help you understand really where you are with credit and how everything comes into play. So credit inquiries, right? So really your FICO score, it considers all types of inquiries that you have. Now, a good rule of thumb is if you're shopping for an apartment or you're shopping for a mortgage or a car and so forth, to do all that within a 45-day window. Because what happens is when you do that in a 45 window, it counts as one credit hit as opposed to multiples, right? So when you're going through that exercise, really try to collapse and truncate it. Now, if you're randomly doing it over time, then that will be multiple hits And ultimately that will be, reduce your credit score because of those multiple hits. So as we're talking about protecting your finances, you want to make sure that you have the right behaviors so that over time, your score will maintain a higher status, a great status, and ultimately you'll have the benefits of having that higher credit score. Okay. Real quick, really some myths and realities. There are a lot of myths out there, right? And so these are kind of some of the top ones that I pulled in here. But really to dispel some of those myths, the one that I'm really going to talk about quickly is a poor score will stay poor forever. That's not true. Remember what I said earlier. FICO scores are based on a period of time, your behavior over a period of time. And so as your behavior changes over time, so will your score, right? So if you have or making healthy decisions and healthy behaviors, right, then your score will get better over time. So when you pull your credit bureau, if you see that the score is not good, do not be dismayed. Now that just means that you need to take action. You need to change your behavior. And so there are steps that you can take to change your behavior, right? As we talked about that credit wheel, pay on time and things of that sort, where ultimately your score will go from bad to better to good to great. Okay. So really that's the important thing. You can change or make a change. You can control this. You just need to modify your behavior. So ways to improve your financial health. Really, it's, as I mentioned earlier, pay your bills on time. Apply for credit only when you need it, right? Some people just apply because you want to have it. But really, it's you get what you need and you deal with that, right? You manage that so that you're managing your needs versus your wants, right? Keep your balances low and pay them off every month as best as possible, right? And if you have to make monthly payments, pay more than what's required so that obviously you can pay down any type of interest that's accrued and you're eating away at, the principal that's owed. And then really, and we'll talk about this more later, reviewing your credit report and regularly so that you have an idea as to what's in your credit report so that there are no surprises. Okay. So this is our first checkpoint. All right. I mentioned there are questions, right? So this is the first checkpoint that I'm going to ask some questions on. So first question is, why is it important for you to understand how credit works and its impact on your credit history? Okay, I'll read that again. Why is it important for you to understand how credit works and its impact on your credit history? Now, anybody out there have an answer that they want to share? Don't be shy. This is judgment free. There are, just speak to what you know or what you've heard and just share. Why is it important for you to understand how credit works and its impact on your credit history? Anybody?
APRs, things like that.
Okay, APRs. That's a good one.
Mortgages,
Okay,
any of that kind of stuff.
exactly. Okay. Okay, I get that. And I see future purchases. I see, so you can improve your credit. That's good. That's good. Good credit can save you thousands of dollars. These are all great answers, right? And basically, it'll help you modify your behavior, right? So depending on where you are with your credit, reviewing it, right, and understanding how credit works really helps you make great decisions going forward, okay? Now, also, the next question that I was going to ask is, what are some of the lasting impacts of credit in your life, right? And I heard something, APR, mortgages, things of that sort. Again, some of these things, really, your credit impacts your ability to purchase a house, your ability to rent if you're not purchasing, ability to, acquire a car and so forth. It ultimately increases your cost in some cases or decreases your cost, right? And just in terms of how you're managing your credit. Someone shared a quick saying with me years ago, and it says, it's expensive to have bad credit. And it is. You think about it. If your credit is good, you get all the benefits. You get the best interest rates, you get the reward programs, you get all the offers. But if your credit is not so good, if your credit is bad, you're already in a bad situation. That means you're paying more. Your costs are higher, your interest rates, APRs are higher. So it makes it that much more difficult. So that's why it's important when you're talking about protecting your finances to understand the importance of credit and how that plays in your finances. Okay, we're moving along. So really talking about reviewing your credit report, right? It's important to do so simply because, again, as I mentioned earlier, when you're applying for credit, the company whom you're requesting the credit from really goes to the credit agencies. That's TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian. And essentially what they do is they provide a snapshot, as I mentioned, as to what your behavior is, right? And whether you're a good or a bad risk as it relates to credit. So that said, it's good for you to review your credit as on a regular cadence to understand what's there. And so really, in terms of reviewing your credit, it's good to go to annualcreditreport.com. Reason being is because every year they allow you a free credit report. So what I tend to do, and this doesn't mean you have to do this, is at the beginning of the year, I go to annualcreditreport.com, pull a credit bureau, and that gives me a history right there. And then at the end of the first quarter, I go to the next one, which would be TransUnion, pull a bureau, because they give you a free credit bureau every year. Then I go to Equifax and so forth at the end of every quarter. So in a calendar year, I have 4 opportunities to review my credit. So if something happens or something changes, I'm now in a good position where I know there's no surprises and I can be proactive in terms of doing what I need to do to not only protect my credit, but ultimately, as a result of that, I'm managing and protecting my finances so that I'm in control of the entire situation. So as we talk about reviewing your credit or your credit bureau, really, again, I'm going to go through this kind of quickly because I believe you've done this. In your credit bureau, you have information, right? Personal information, the amount of credit that you have available, the amount of credit that you use, and then really record on how you make your payments, right? And so with that said, as you can see in the first segment here, it shows your personal information, right? Make sure that that's correct, your name and social security number. You have no idea how many instances I've come across where just because of a change where somebody put down the wrong information, it translates into somebody else's issue, right? So it's always good as you're reviewing to make sure your personal information is correct. Now, also, as you're looking at it, look at your credit inquiries. Make sure that that makes sense. Special messages. If you've fallen victim to identity theft, there'll most likely be a message here based on your communication with your bureau to make sure that they understand and they're notifying entities and companies that there's a unique situation going on with you. And so that'll alert them to kind of have a different perspective when reviewing your credit, okay? And then really the last segment, the important segment, the really important segment is where you look at available credit, your payment methodology, and your history. And this really gives a sense on behavior, right? What you're doing and how you're managing, right? So it's important to really take a good snapshot of this and really understand what's going on with credit. All right, another checkpoint, real quick question. Why is it important for you to review your credit? Why is it important to review your credit? Any answers out there? Okay, I see errors. Check for identity theft. Correct, correct. Again, remember I mentioned it's important to do so that you are in control of the situation. So the sooner you find if there's an error or the sooner you identify there's identity theft, then you can take action. You can take the appropriate steps to correct and make sure that everything is in order and in good standing. Okay, let's move forward. So let's talk about protecting yourself, okay? So really, there are plenty of scam artists out there, right? And each of them, are promising, a deal that, seems too good to be true, right? So although there are many types of scams, really, I'm going to identify 3 that you should be aware of, right? So the first is debt relief, where there's a promise to wipe out your debts and stop, credit harassment. Be careful because certainly there are no quick fixes to credit issues. In most cases, many of these agencies are putting you on the pathway for bankruptcy, right? So you should consider all actions that you take that involves bankruptcy. Make sure you understand, get all the information that you need necessary to make the right decision. There's also another type that's out there where it's advanced fee loan scams, right? So basically they're promoting if you have credit problems, for an upfront fee, they can guarantee that, they'll get you the loan that you want. First off, be careful if anyone is guaranteeing that you can get anything. Most likely, more often than not, it's a scam. So you have to be careful for guarantees, because there is no company that's reputable that will guarantee you that they can get you credit or secure a loan or funding or anything of that sort. And then the third is credit repair scams, right? So they're telling you that they can erase any bad credit. So there's many outfits out there that convince you that they can make a bank, they can convince you that they can make a bankruptcy, judgment, tax liens, any of those things disappear, right? And one of the things is, really you want to make sure that you pay attention, because, they'll want you to, pay before the services are provided. Be careful for that. Or they'll suggest that you, invent a new credit report by applying under an EIN or an employee identification number. Be careful for that too. These are all fraudulent things. So really, if you're trying to, pay your credit, certainly speak to the credit consumer agency. There are processes to help you and do that. And certainly I'll share a couple tidbits and items as well. All right. So really, the other thing to guard against credit theft is, think about it this way, right? You protect your wallet, you lock your car, and you hide your jewelry, right? So are you as careful as it relates to your identity? So if someone steals your identity, your credit rating now becomes at risk. Remember, I told you, again, 300 to 850, the lower your credit score, the worse your credit rating becomes, right? So in this case, really prevention is definitely easier, all right, in terms of making sure that you're taking the right actions and you're taking the right steps, right? So guard and protect your social security number. Make sure that, you're not using it or you're carrying it around with you. Certainly don't put it on, if you're writing checks, put it on your checks or things of that sort, simply because that information is a gateway to your identity, right? As you're choosing passwords, make sure that you're not using passwords that are easy to use. Use a variation of numbers and letters. Don't use things that, it's simple, like names or things of that sort. Really be shrewd and tactical in terms of what you're using. Pay attention to your mail and your trash, right? Shred everything that you're putting in the trash. There are people that will take painstaking efforts to go through your trash, piece it together in order to secure information on you, okay? So really, again, be careful about those things and take steps and actions to protect yourself. Now, if you think your identity's been stolen, first thing first is report it to the credit agencies. They'll place a fraud alert, which is free. Remember, I mentioned that in the special notice section. They'll place that there. Get copies of your credit report from each of the agencies. Comb through it. Identify which is not correct. Let them know, and they will do the due diligence. They will do the research to make sure, to verify that it's not correct, and then they will ultimately remove it. File a police report as well. Make sure that that's filed as well, so that you have that to corroborate that you've become a victim of identity theft. Contact your banks. Let them know so that they can also monitor to make sure that there aren't any out of character transactions that are happening and taking place on a regular interval, okay? Now, also, again, when you're going through your credit report, as I mentioned, make sure you pay attention to the steps here. Get a copy of everything, right, from the credit reporting agencies. Get a copy of making sure that you have the police report, making sure that you have everything's categorized so that you're monitoring it as you're going through the steps. Now, essentially, it generally takes about 30 days to investigate an issue, but stay on top of it. Check in with the agencies to make sure that they're making progress and you're aware as to what's taking place and how things are transpiring. And so this next slide here, these are the three agencies. These are their numbers. These are the websites. Make note of this so that certainly you have that available. Should you need to contact them, then that information is there and available to help you. So real quick, as we're wrapping this up, financial health tips, okay? Really, the first thing is, as you're managing your finance, is have a budget. Your budget is your financial roadmap. it tells you the inflow and the outflow of cash. As you're talking about protecting your finances, managing your finances in terms of how you spend is critical. Pay your obligations on time. I mentioned that earlier. Late payments and collections, they do affect your score, right? Manage your accounts, keep your balances low. Where possible, pay the entire balance. If you have to carry a balance, pay more than what's the minimum amount that's required of you, so that certainly you can get to that zero balance quicker, as opposed to just allowing it to drag on over time. Okay. So here's a real quick example of how to create a budget if you haven't done a budget, right? Use the 50-20-30 rule. And as you can see here, 50% goes towards your living expenses and essentials. These are your needs, right? 20% towards your financial goals, emergency fund, retirement savings, paying off debt, right? Again, these are some things that you need to consider. And then 30% for flexible spending. These are your wants. If you want to go to the movie, you play, whatever the case may be. So as you can see, 70% of your income is going towards financial goals and living expenses. 30% are for rewards. So it's really important to stay on track with your budget, where you're able to differentiate between your needs and your wants. Okay. Real quick, and this is the last question I'm going to ask. I'm sorry. What is a good practice? I'm sorry. Why is it a good practice to review your budget on a regular basis? Why is it a good practice to review your budget on a regular basis? Anyone? Okay, to see if you're staying on track, to make sure you're not spending things on things you don't use. Okay, your needs and your goals. Okay, perfect. As I mentioned, this is your financial roadmap. It helps you manage your payments. So as you're looking at your credit, as you're looking at making payments, your budget is your guide to tell you what you can afford to do and what you cannot afford to do. Okay, so again, here's an example. If you haven't done a budget, then this will help you in terms of creating a budget. All right. So really, the last slide is this, right? Last financial health tip. As you're looking at everything, right? Everything that we went over quickly. Again, it's a lot of information, but really the essential piece in terms of protecting your finances is monitoring your credit, all right? Staying on top of that. Being mindful of the information that you get in the mail. Any things that say they can resolve an issue quickly, or they can help mitigate any type of risk. Or the thing is, if you send in payment first, and they'll provide you a service to help, reduce or eliminate erroneous items on your credit. Be careful of them. Protect your social security number, right? Be mindful of all these things, because if you're not careful, if you're not shrewd and you're not proactive, then ultimately that will lead to items showing up in your credit. And if you don't catch it, then that have a negative impact on your credit. And that ultimately leads to more costs and leads to more peril in terms of your managing and protecting your finances. So if you find mistakes on your credit history, contact your bureaus directly. As you see here, these are the numbers. This is the information. And certainly take advantage of all the information that's been provided. Now, with that said, this is the full extent of everything that I had to share with you. I went through it quickly. So I wanted to leave time for questions